Yeah.
My name is James Oleinik. I'm a PM on the PowerApps team, and what I'm going to walking you all through today is kind of what it takes in what we currently have in PowerApps to actually take an application and roll it out within your organization. I'm going to cover some stuff and some kind of things today that don't work so well, and I'm going to also talk about and preview some stuff that's coming. And along the way, shout out through comments and questions into the chat, and Chuck will stop me and answer them along the way.
Yeah,
okay?
Brad, Stephen, Elizabeth says and Fausto says we're good.
All right, then let's get started. So first of all, just to kind of like in terms of terminology, what I'm going to talk about here today is kind of dubbed application lifecycle management, or ALM. And I have a wonderful parentheses at the top there. Sorry about that. But really what this is the full life cycle of rolling out an application to your organization, from development, deploying it, making sure that the right people have access to the application and the underlying data. And then, it's cyclical. You want to be able to monitor the health and usage of that application, and then work on the vNext, and then it goes back to the beginning. And so this is what I'm going to be covering today. And specifically, I'm going to be covering exactly, what can you do today to build these applications, each of these phases: the development, the deployment, the securing, and monitoring. And there's a couple different ways of building applications that I just want to call out. And it really depends on, the scope of your application and how you want to roll it out. So within PowerApps, there are concepts called environments, and environments provide partitioning for permissioning and also all your resources, both the apps you build and the databases that you configure, and for example, the custom APIs you build that the app leverages, the workflows that you build that the app connects to as well. And there's really two different models that you can take when building an application. And the first is that today, you can choose to build your application and distribute them within a single environment. And a lot of users today that have access to PowerApps through Office, you just have access to a single environment, which is the default environment. And at a high level, and I'll walk through this, but at a high level, what that means is that you would have one version of your app that's in production, and it's actually shared out to all your users. And they have access to that, and they can run it. But the problem we have today is that you can't work on that app while it's been shared out with people, because those changes that you're working on, they would immediately see that. Like, we have this model where it's kind of immediately published out as you save versions of the app. So in a model today, what you would have to do, and I'm sure what many of you are doing, is you would save as and create a copy of that app, and work on your vNext bits there and not share that one out publicly. And then save as and replace the prod app when you need to update it. And that's kind of the model we have today. And we'll talk about some advancements we're making and things we're making to make that better. But that works for some apps. But some other apps that, for example, might be relying on the CDS database, where you need to make schema changes, or you have some other reasons why you might want to partition your environments based off of region or based on permissions or security policies. And in that model, you need to either work across multiple environments or even multiple tenants, where you might have, for example, a contract team building an application, and they're under one tenant, and you want to roll out that application within your prod tenant and your prod environment. So how do you do that today? Well, today it's not a great story. So in this multiple environment model, which we support because we have environments, you would be working on vNext of your schema and application in one environment, but then you have to go and manually move all of that content in the app over to the new environment. And that's a little bit tough today. You have to, and I'll walk through what we have today in kind of an end-to-end, but you'd have to save as your app to a local file and then open it up in the new environment to replace the file. And then if you had any, for example, changes in the CDS schema, you would have to export and import that manually as a separate step. Flows and custom APIs would need to be manually recreated or updated in the target environments. And it's really hairy, right, today. And I want to walk through what that experience looks like, but I do want to call out that we know that this isn't great, and we're rolling out some stuff soon to address this. So what I do want to call out is just kind of walk through kind of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go within web.powerapps.com, and I actually have an app here. This is the app that I had built for the build demo that we had just a couple weeks ago. And it's an app that it's essentially just a Twitter client, and it also leverages a common data service to source some common data or metadata for the application. So once it loads, you'll see here, this is just an application that this data is surfaced from the CDS entity, but I believe I also have a screen down here that pulls it directly from Twitter, right? And so this is just a simple application, right? And you can see here if I search for my my Twitter handle, it'll show, hey, here's my webinar that I was hosting today. So this is, this is a Power App that's actually running and being, running in the studio. And I have this deployed in my prod environment here. So what would it take to go and build a new version of that app, right? So, the first thing I could do is, the first model, as I said, all I would need to do if I didn't want to worry about and I wasn't making any schema changes, for example, to the CDS entity underneath the covers, all I would need to do is just save this app, to a different version of the app within my environment, and I can work on it there. Because the critical thing, like just to reiterate what I talked about earlier, is that this app, all right, is actually shared out. For example, let's consider that this app is actually shared out within my organization and people are using it, right?
Can you go back there and show me where you chose the environment? Was it because of that drop down?
Oh, just the drop down. So this is just consider this build demo environment as my prod environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm not worried about changing any of the underlying data sources, I can just work on vNext of the app by just saving a different copy of it within the environment.
Got it.
And working on it there. And then once I'm done with those changes, all I have to do to update it is do a replace here. So that, and that's kind of like the gymnastics you can do if you don't need to worry about the underlying data. But let's say that I do for a second, right? And let's say
Elizabeth's saying slow down just a little bit.
Oh,
sure. Be a little bit too caffeinated for her at this moment.
Sure. I'm two cups down, so I understand that.
Right.
So all I'm saying here, Elizabeth, is that and company is that this is the side-by-side development you can do today, where the only problem, just to reiterate, is that if this is my, sorry, I didn't mean to click on that. If this is my prod app that I've shared out with people, people are actually consuming this app. This app is available to them in the PowerApps client. They're using it, right? If I go and edit this app right now, right, and I'm working on it and I break it, they will immediately see that issue, right? And so we don't want to do that. We don't want to break them in production. So all I showed is through the studio experience, which is, this is our web studio. You can also do it in our Windows application that you can download from the store on Windows 8 or 10. But in the web studio, all I would need to do if I wanted to work on vNext of this app is save it under a new name. And I just saved it under build 2. And then I can edit that particular application and work on the next version of it. And it's not going to be shared out with everyone. So going back to the studio, going back to this app, say this is my vNext app, right? I can share this with my collaborators, and it's not the one that's actually distributed. It's to everyone within my organization. And once I'm done with this app, I can replace the previous app with this version, and that new version of the app is immediately published out to everyone.
Makes perfect sense.
Right. So, but now, so that's all fine and good. But let's say for instance that this app leverages an entity. If we go back to the application real quick. It leverages an entity in the common data services called message board posts, okay? So if I go back to my environment here and I go to entities, and it loads eventually, and I'm going to open up that entity, the message board post, and let's say, for example, that the change I needed to make in this application required a schema change to this entity. Let's say here that, I'm just going to show you the data. So this is just storing some of the local messages. But let's say, for example, that I needed to change the name of one of these columns. Like, for example, I needed to change the name or remove a column from one of these from one of these rows here, one of these entities. Now, if I go and make that change in prod within this same environment, the prod version of the app hasn't been updated to handle that change yet. So it would break that app in production. So how do I do this, all right? And the same thing goes to say, if I have this app that leverages a custom connector and I need to go make a change to that custom connector, any changes to the underlying data sources, right? If those need to change in a breaking way, if I make that change in production, it's going to break the version of my app that's already out there, whereas I haven't had a chance to actually do the update to the app to consume those changes. So how do you do that? And that leads into the multiple environment approach that I was talking about earlier. So what I did through the admin center right before I started this call today is I created the testing environment. So let's assume here that I have this separate environment, right, that is just for me and just for my testing changes is my staging or development environment, right? And here is where I can create those changes, for example, to my custom API and publish it here. I can create those changes to my entity here, right here. And then I can update my app within this environment to consume those changes. And so the first question is like, how do you get your app over into a new environment, right? And the way you do that is, if I go back to my app here that I built here, what you can do is you can save this app and save it locally to your computer. And then what that's going to do is it's going to store a local copy of the app through what we call MS app file. And you can save that app within the new environment. And that's the way you kind of move apps across environments today. And so all I would need to do to save it into my new testing environment here, and as you can see, I've already done it. But if I hadn't already done that, the way you would do it is you would open up the studio within the new environment here, and I would open this app from that file. And then you could just click browse files here and click that app that we just created. And what you would do is you open this app and save that app within that new environment. And that creates a copy of it there, and then you can build your changes.
Brad, that should have answered your question. If it didn't, Brad just asked you exactly that question.
Yep.
Do that. If it didn't, please chat in the chat window so that way we can clarify more. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, and by the way, there's a doc article that I wrote a month ago that covers this end-to-end flow as well. And so anyway, so I've loaded this app, and literally all you have to do is save it in this new environment, my testing environment here. So it's loaded from that file. Now, part of the problem with doing this today is sometimes some of these data sources need to be replaced and repointed within the new environment. You can see here that we did a good job of repointing them automatically. But when you move these across environments today, sometimes you might need to do that. But that being said, that's how you move stuff and create copies of your apps from production to testing. And within this new environment, I would make those changes to my message board posts entity. I would update my app to consume those changes. And then I would do the same process to move the changes of my app back to production. I would save a local copy of the app and replace the app in production. Now, this is very manual. This is not great. It doesn't make you feel real good around all this. But one thing I'll cover later is that we're planning on exposing a new feature called packaging that will allow you to do all this fairly seamlessly. And what I mean by that is that, for example, if I'm in my testing environment now and I've switched environments, and I'm going to show you a preview of this packaging feature.
Very cool.
Where, say, here's this app that we have built, and say it's the V next to the app in our testing environment. And what you'll have the ability to do is you'll have the ability to click export for that app, right? And so what export is going to do, and we don't have this working end to end, but just kind of
imagine if we will.
Yeah, imagine if you will. Like, what this is going to be able to do is it's going to be able to say, okay, I'm exporting this as a tweets package. It has the app that I'm building, and it also packages all of the dependent changes that come along with this. So in this case, that change that I'm making to my message board post entity would be packaged along with this application. Whereas today, you would need to manually do a change to the app and the schema of the database separately. And the way you would do the schema of the database is that there's an entry point within the admin center today to do that.
I know you've been talking about intra-environment porting. Would this actually be able to work intra-tenant?
Yes. So
very cool.
So the same notion of moving from one environment to the other would also, this same packaging concept. Oh, and by the way, the saving the local MS app would work as well. Yeah. So saving apps across tenants. Okay. And I know we have partners and customers today that have multiple tenancies where they move apps across them today. Right. So you would export it exports it as a zip file. And then within my prod environment here, and this is the part that isn't quite working today, if I go to my apps list, I can just import that package right here. And I can select that package from my downloads section always takes a long time to load. It's really weird. But I would just select that package that I just exported.
And it would put the connections, used to be called custom APIs. It would bring the MS apps file, and if you had CDS entities.
And any flows that the app.
Oh, the flows, of course.
Right. So whereas today you would have to manually move the CDS changes, manually move your app, manually recreate any changes to the custom connectors, manually recreate changes to any of the flows that you built, you'll be able to export all of this in one package and move it across. And this is as far as the demo gets today. Like, we're literally building this right now, but in the next, we believe, month, this will be out there. And so you'll be able to use packaging to move all of the contents independent resources of the app, including the app itself, from one environment to another or one tenant to another. Whereas today you have to do the manual process that I had shown you before.
Very cool.
And real quick, and I realize I jumped ahead a little bit, but I'm going to go to the I'm going to go to our admin center real quick. I do want to call out the moving of CDS schema. Like if you have to move like the definition of the entity or multiple entities you've created can be done from the admin center today, admin.powerapps.com. All you have to do is go to the environment where you created the CDS database and made those changes. Here's my testing environment, and click export. And this will give you kind of a package just of the CDS changes today. But the process, the flow I just showed you, the packaging flow that we're building into the Maker portal would replace this. It would support this flow as well as being able to export all of the app and all the other resources as well. Okay.
Nice.
So I mean, it shows you today, like, and if anyone has any other questions, it kind of shows you how you would move an app and its resources today, and kind of where we're envisioning this going in the future.
So I have a question for the 35 people watching. Is that going to solve your needs? I think it does. I can't think of any outlier scenarios where it's not going to solve your needs. But if it's not, we'd love to hear about it now. This is one of the reasons James does these calls. Okay. No questions.
Cool.
They said that what you showed was they got it. Seems pretty straightforward.
Okay, cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is, and I have a couple other feature things I want to show as well. But before I get there, so what we kind of covered so far is the development, deploying, and how things are secured today, like through sharing the app as either a contributor or user. But there's also that last step of the process, which is, once your app is out there in production, you want to have the ability to understand who's using it. Are there any issues with the app? And understanding, like, once it's out there to lots of users, how you can act on it and then even drive new changes or updates to the application. And so what I am here to tell you today is that we have in preview, so it's not available publicly through our website or portal, is a way of viewing some app analytics and error analytics for the applications that you build today. And if you're interested, we can onboard you. All you have to do is send an email to that alias, which maybe you could just type in the chat window, just so once I get off the screen, people can have it, if you are interested in seeing this. And so I'm just going to give you a quick preview of it today. And I'm also happy to say that what you see here, we are working over the next coming months to take these reports here and make them available to everyone within the web portal, web.powerapps.com, and our admin center. So what you see here is kind of an initial prototype report. And this is just an environment where we have some test apps for the Microsoft tenant. So this is actually apps that are available to broadly within our tenant, but this is
internally we do things like register our vacation, we go out and send kudos, we figure out what the menus is around the campus.
That's right.
All using PowerApps. So this is what James is monitoring right now.
That's right. And these are like Chuck said, these are line of business apps that our actual our IT department at Microsoft has built and rolled out. This isn't the actual data for the prod versions of the app. These are kind of the test data. So
sure.
Just because I didn't want to show the real data just for compliance concerns. But like this is, as you can see here, we have a couple different reports that we've built. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but it has things such as how many times the app has been launched, how many sessions, how many times the app has been launched, how many users are hitting it, what platforms are they launching the app across, because as you know, PowerApps can be launched on web, on the iPhone, the Android, on Macs, on Windows Phone players as well. So it has usage information across our platforms, and it also gives you visibility into where the app is being launched.
How could an iPhone be larger than Android? Color me skeptical. How's that?
You mean for, again, this is the sparse data, so I think this is
this is because we're actually looking at some test runs.
So this is just kind of like, there's a small set of test users here, so this is not like the prod data. Like
the reason I ask is I'm looking at the tables, and my iPhone, or sorry, my Android phone is right next to James's Android phone.
Yeah.
So anyways.
So yeah, what I'm saying is don't worry about the actual.
Oh, I see. Got it.
Like we also have, so same as the usage reports here, how many times it's launched, how many users are launching it. We have some reports around location, so where they're actually launching the application, geographically. and based on which version of our player is actually being used to launch it. We have information around, and we're working on this too. This is just some very initial reports, information around errors that the app is hitting and the type of errors and the type of operation. So, and error reporting is also an area that we're gonna enrich this report. We also have information around how long it takes for the app to actually.
Are you also going to see? I'm an old application insights guy.
Yep.
One of the reports I actually found the absolute most interesting and valuable to me was the dependencies I called out to, and then they came back from. So I can see my runs, and then I go out and say I called out to SQL Server or web.
Right.
Is that something that you guys are going to offer? Is maybe not initially, but something?
So you lead me right into service performance.
Score for Chuck.
We did not coordinate this, people, I swear to God. So again,
they know that.
Oh. Leading questions, I love them. So for example, this is calling out to several different APIs, this particular app, and this actually has the time it takes observed from the app on how long those APIs took to respond, and how many times that we connected to that data. And you can filter this based on API. And the data is kind of sparse here, but if you actually had a lot of usage of your app, you would see this light up. And so not only through the app performance can you see the actual performance of the app itself in terms of user experience, but you also have of all the data sources and services it connects to through our connectors or custom API infrastructure, you can see the performance of those APIs as well.
So Martinez and Brad both have questions related to this. So Brad's asking, how long is a piece of string question? And I'll tell you what I mean by that. This is off topic, and it's not actually, Brad. This is exactly on topic. What is the current state of scalability within PowerApps? And then he goes out and gives you an example, i.e., can I query and manage a 100K record table? And of course, he's asking, how long is a piece of string? Because the answer is, it depends, right? Yep. So did you want to go through that with them, or?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends, right? So, but what it depends on is what connector you're leveraging today. So PowerApps has a concept called delegation. So when you surface data within an application, you can leverage things like filtering and sorting that data. And certain one of those functions based on the connector support delegation of making those choices on the server. So if the connector supports delegation, and we have in our documentation for our connectors, which is docs.microsoft.com/connectors here, it calls out which connectors and which data and which actions and which calls there support delegation. If delegation is supported, it doesn't matter how much data there is on the server side, because the app is going to call the connector to call in and host the data.
Well, it matters, but the latency is on their side.
The latency is on their side.
Right.
In terms of if storing data locally in the app
is the cost.
And if their delegation isn't supported, we have a 500 row limit today. Okay. Right. We are also talking around making that configurable, like in the near future, where you can, and the reason that 500 is chosen is just for performance reasons, which is things slow down if the data sets you store locally on the app get bigger, especially if you're doing joins of that data across data sources, as you can imagine. And so if you need to store it locally, or if a connector doesn't support delegation, 500 is your limit. If delegation is supported, you defer that cost to the server, and it doesn't matter how many records there are.
And this is what James is working on with this telemetry, to actually give you insight into exactly that, because other things are going to cause latency would be the number of controls, the number of galleries, the number of images. Now, Carlos on the team, who's the dev lead, is working on factoring that load, but right now we do load it up front. Yeah. So Martinez was asking, I think you mentioned this and I forgot, is asking, when's the estimated time that they're going to be able to take a look at analytics?
So
where they're going to get it.
As I was talking, this here, if you have apps, you can email this alias below, and we can onboard you, and you can take, so the PA Analytics app, sorry, just calling out here, PA Analytics admin at Microsoft.com.
You asked me to do that earlier, and I did.
Yeah, send an email there, and we can onboard you. So for the apps that you built, you can take a look at the analytics we have right now. It's prototype analytics. It's not going to be the final version. We're working on porting over and evolving this analytics into our actual web.powerapps.com and the Flow portal as well. We're going to have Flow analytics as well, and so that's going to be coming, I'd say, in the coming months. I'm actually working on that right now and driving it with the Flow team and some of our resources in IDC. So yep.
Brad said thank you. That answers exactly this question.
Cool. So What I also want to talk about today, and we've covered a lot of this, covered this a little bit, which is, what is kind of coming in our model, right? In the develop, deploy, secure, monitor, world, how are we evolving from what we have today? And we kind of alluded a little bit to the packaging concept that's covered below, but we're also adding some new things within just development within a single environment. So there's a couple things that are coming. The first is we're going to be adding the ability to enforce authoring sessions. So if you have multiple contributors working on the same app, you don't override each other. Think of this as kind of like a lock on the app. And then second, we're adding autosave. So this is where you will not lose your progress if you're working on your app in a browser or the studio and the app crashes. We're going to be auto-saving that to the cloud and you won't lose your progress. And then the third thing I want to call out is, in addition to packaging, we're adding something called save and publish. And what this tries to address is within that single environment model of developing applications we talked about earlier, where you had to create copies of the app, we're actually adding, kind of think of it as two versions of an application. There's a draft version and a published version. And what that means is that the people that you share the app to as a user, right, will see the published version of your application, but we'll be supporting a draft version that contributors can work on that is not available to all of your users of the application until you publish it.
Got it.
And this is actually, it's not fully available within our test environment. We're going to be rolling it out soon, but let me just go to tip one, our test environment here. And I'm just going to open up that app that we were working on earlier within the web. And I'll show you what I mean here between test and publish. And I wish I could show you the full end-to-end. It's not working yet. But again, what this allows you is, like, if, for example, you have access to PowerApps through Office 365, you don't have different environments, but you want the ability to work on new versions of your app without having to create copies of it, since you already have that app shared out. What you'll be able to do is, say I'm making a change to this application here where, let's just say I want the default to be PowerApps, and then J. Oleinik. Okay. And I want to save this, okay? So when I save this within the test environment here, it's actually going to save it as a draft. And if I go to the save experience, you'll see here that the draft is saved, but it's not published yet, right? And what this means is that, like, just as I was saying, if there's any contributors on my app, they'll be able to open and see my latest changes in the draft. But if I shared it to my org or shared it to Chuck here, Chuck, as a user, sees only the published versions. And what we're going to be adding is within the actual web portal, your ability to see these multiple different versions. And we're going to add the ability for you to see which version is published and the latest changes. You see it's not working here yet. And then you'll have the ability to promote the latest draft version to the published version when you're ready.
Sandy and UB4000 are clapping. They're cheering. So
yeah, because I imagine that anyone who's building applications today and having to create copies of them, they're very frustrated by it. Believe me, I am as well.
I love Sandy's metaphor. It's like when you create a blog post. You're going to go through iterations. You're going to go out and test it. You're going to save it, but you're not ready to publish it.
That's right.
Great metaphor, Sandy.
That's right. Now, by the way, save and publish is also relevant for the packaging flow as well, because once you actually import your package with the update of your app to your production environment, it's going to be imported in the draft version first. And so, even if you're in this multi-environment model where you have to move a lot of resources from one environment to another, when they're imported in your prod environment, you want to test the draft version of your app that it works first, and then you publish that app. So save and publish not only helps just the single environment model, but also helps the multiple environment model where you have to, when you're modifying the underlying data sources as well. Now, by the way, there's nothing that precludes you from creating copies of your app if you want to continue on that model, or if there's some other reasons why you want to do that. But I think this is going to make developing and iterating on apps a hell of a lot easier. Okay. And the good thing is that save and publish and packaging, as you saw here, we already have kind of versions of it working in our test environment. They're going to be coming in the next couple of months. And I say within 1.5 to 2 months from now, this is going to be live for you guys to use and try out. Okay. Some stuff that's a little bit farther out is, instead of actually having to export as a hard, like, zip file package, we are going to eventually be investing in your ability just to straight copy an app or its dependent resources from one environment to another without actually having to go through the process of downloading the package itself. But at least the package will give you a way of manually moving the contents or your schema or your app today. Okay. And as I had articulated, the ability to view all those analytics that I'm talking about is going to be coming for apps within web.powerapps.com. It's going to be coming for Flow to flow.microsoft.com, and we're also going to be adding it within the Admin Center. And we should be actually posting a banner within the web.powerapps.com portal with a survey link. I think it's going to be going out possibly today or tomorrow. So if you do log in and you see that banner and the survey link, I would ask you to provide feedback on the type of analytics that you'd like to see, because we're going to use that to think around how we're going to evolve our current prototype analytics into what we actually roll out in production. Okay. Any other questions?
Brad says, I really, really hope that PowerApps sticks around this time. It must be a light switch or an info path or you get the idea.
Brad, me too.
Us too.
You from, rolling out from a solution perspective, and me for, a job security perspective.
Yeah,
but
you don't want James living in a Maytag
I'm also a user and a builder of applications and a developer in, another life. So I also I understand where your skepticism comes from, but, the one thing I will say regarding kind of staying power for this product, there's really two things. And again, take it with a grain of salt because I obviously work for Microsoft. There's number one, the SharePoint community is taking a big bet on PowerApps being the InfoPath replacement, right? And we are being deeply integrated within SharePoint. We're being positioned to the whole SharePoint community as the solution. So number one, that gives me some confidence on the staying power. And then secondly, we're also being positioned as the extensibility story and platform, both Flow and PowerApps, for the Dynamics 365 ecosystem and Office 365.
It's guaranteed to give us legs, guys. I mean, we are built on the same underlying platform. So as long as Dynamics is going to stick around, James is going to be out of a Maytag box. He's got a job.
Exactly. So I mean, agreed. It's happened before. However, in terms of one thing I will say is that in the old Microsoft way, you would see that there were probably competing teams within Microsoft trying to do the same thing, trying to be the same web app solution, trying to be the same form over data solution. At the very least, that's not happening anymore.
I have no idea what you're talking about. ODBC, RDO, OLADB, ADO, no idea.
Exactly. So at least we do not have competing voices within our same company now, in terms of now, that being said, we still need to deliver, and we know that there are a lot of gaps in what we can do today, and gaps in terms of being able to do the job that, for example, LightSwitch did for web apps, or do the job that InfoPath did in a simple way for forms over data and forms over, SharePoint data. And we know we're still have a long way to go, but at least I think we have staying power. So take that with a grain of salt.
Good.
One other thing I do want to call out is that, in terms of security, there's a couple other things that are happening. So in terms of CDS, if you do leverage the Common Data Service databases today for any of your projects, one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk around, go to our test admin center. So you're probably aware, if you do use CDS, on how the current security model works today. And today, we just have user roles, and user roles that are enforced at an entity level. Right? They basically just grant you access at just the entity. So it doesn't give you actual row level access to the post that I put in that message board post entity, making sure that Chuck can't read my entries that I make to that entity, and I can't read his. But that is coming. We're going to be adding RLS policies, and again, this is our test environment, as well as be able to define your business hierarchy and use that business hierarchy within your row level security policies that you define. And this is a little bit farther out, and I'm not going to go through this in detail because we have blog posts and previews that are coming out by our CDS team that are launching, but we are evolving our security story to actually handle a lot of the gaps that we have today with CDS and actually rolling out CDS to production. Whereas, the model for apps is we're still going to remain the same in terms of having contributors and users on apps. But one thing I would ask is if you have any feedback on our current security model or being able to roll that out or getting visibility from an administrative point of view, I would also love to hear that feedback if any of you have it. Okay. Are there any other high-level questions?
Grundavan Praveen Rao, easy for him to say, had a question, but I think he's in a different webinar, but I'll ask the question anyways.
Okay.
He wants to know, when is PowerApps going to be able to support things like stored procedures and views?
Yes, so this is something that is a big gap today. So first of all, for stored procedures are supported by Flow, which is our partner product. And all PowerApps licenses include a license to Flow. And so what you can do today is you can create a flow, as I'll show you here. Let's see, a stored procedure.
Ad hoc demos, love it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we're getting off our formal,
but anyway,
formal type script here.
Yeah, so it's under SQL here. Server, actions, and execute stored procedure.
Okay.
So, actually, here, let me do a PowerApps. Sorry.
Oh, the trigger is.
Yeah, sorry.
So hopefully you've all been on a flow webinar with me. You can go out and trigger flows from different activities. PowerApps is one of those. So we're going to go ahead and trigger this from a PowerApp, and then the activity itself is going to be to launch that stored procedure.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to show here. So what you can do today, admittedly, it's not great or not perfect, is that PowerApps can execute flows, and flows, as you see here, can execute stored procedures. Now, even this has a lot of gaps in terms of what's supported today, but at least we do have an avenue to initiate those. Now, actually having stored procedures and views tightly integrated within PowerApps is a huge gap today. We know it's a huge gap, and we're going to be working in the coming months. I know it's going to be a priority through the second half of this calendar year for us to add this capabilities.
And Archana and Dima talked about it 2 weeks ago, so you might want to watch the webinar 2 weeks ago.
Maybe we can add a link to it.
Yeah, I'll add a link to it.
But yes.
But we didn't cover this, so this is kind of cool.
Yep.
This tactic for solving that problem today.
Yep. Cool.
Stephen Veloto, I have a question about deploying sharing PowerApps within an environment. I just need a little clarification about the existing sharing functionality.
Okay.
So why don't you bring up the share dialog box? Oops. And Stephen, if you could actually maybe clarify what that question is around sharing while James is bringing up the dialog.
Sure.
We can run that down.
So just at a high level, let me just kind of give the spiel on sharing.
Okay.
The sharing spiel, if you will. Alliteration is great in my opinion. So first off, let's just go over the basics of sharing. So when you share an application within PowerApps today, you can do so directly to principals. So here, like for example, John Doe. You can also share an app to any security group. Okay. You can also share an app within your entire organization if you want. Now, once you share an app, it's shared with a certain permission level. So if I share an app with someone with can edit, when those users log into web.powerapps.com or log into our studio application, they will see that app within this environment. They will be able to edit that app. They will be able to publish, or play it, by the way. They'll be able to publish updates to that application. So if I share my app to John with Ken Edit, he can be thought of as a contributor to this application. He and I are working to collaborate on building this application.
Okay.
When I share an application to someone with Ken use permissions, they're going to be a consumer of that application.
So I'm going to pause you just for a second. So Stephen, as you saw the dialog box, asked, is there a limit around the types of groups? Because there are security groups and there are security groups and there are security groups.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm being facetious because there are distribution groups, there are Office 365 groups. So which of those type of groups do we support? Or do we support all of them?
We do not support distribution groups. We support AAD security groups. We do not support Office 365 groups yet, just based off of how those are represented.
I was going to say, those are not true security objects in the AAD, so that makes sense.
Yes, I know that this is kind of a long-standing open item in terms of how Office groups are represented in AAD, in Azure Active Directory. And until they're going to be until they're handled as actually real security principles within AAD, we're it's hard for us to add support for them.
Yep.
Now, we have gotten the request around, adding support for that kind of and doing out-of-band support that. We just haven't prioritized that. Now, one big piece of feedback and ask for a new feature that we've gotten on our community is the ability to share this, for example, with someone outside of my tenant. So, sharing it with Chuck at,
Foreign principals, B2C, B2B. Yep.
Yeah, foreign tenant on Microsoft.com. So today we actually block sharing to this because this is not actually in my tenant. It's not in the PowerFlow build tenant, right? Now, one thing we are thinking about prioritizing based on the overwhelming feedback we've gotten is the ability to support sharing this to Chuck like this. So that Chuck is in another tenant, but Chuck would be able to either contribute or use this application.
Having gone through this in my old job, this actually opens up a huge can of worms for everybody on the phone, because when you go to log in, then they have to actually add a tenant picker to say which ones where you want to be in.
That is correct.
So I understand the work that's involved there.
And if you use SharePoint today and you use external sharing to users in SharePoint, you have this same experience today, because as Chuck is articulating, now Chuck is really a member of multiple different tenants. He's a member of his own tenant, the foreign tenant here. He's also now going to be a member of the PowerFlow build tenant. And so as you're articulating, you have to choose which tenant you log into when you authenticate to the service.
In Power BI, you see them and you go to add them, it gives you a nasty error. So it's suboptimal. So Steven's finally gotten to his point. Sorry that I haven't been reading it a little bit better. He's saying that he's actually using AD Sync and bringing down 80 groups from other locations, and he's not seeing those. So he must have like a transitive trust or some sort of domain domain trust, and he's bringing them across, and he's not seeing them. So
interesting.
Stephen, you're going to need to create a support case. I have done lots of different AD stuff, as it may sound, and I haven't seen that particular problem. I do see those replicated Active Directory groups, security groups. So if you call those support people, and maybe I'm actually doing something different.
So, Stephen, what I would do is go to PowerApps.com, click on support here, search for your issue. So if it's, AD sync groups or whatever, however you articulate this, and then you should be able to, through here, to file a new ticket. Actually, no.
All the way at the bottom, I think it says create support ticket. It'll force you to search in all cases. You didn't know I wrote specs. This is actually this is one of the pages I created.
You show it shows it all the way at the bottom, right?
That's what I said, and I'm not saying it. Okay.
Weird.
So
anyway,
I owe you guys a link. You may have to be signed in but normally when you create support ticket, it forces you through the sign in. So I'm going to look up that, Stephen. And my email address is chass@microsoft.com, and we're going to figure out how to actually help you create a case. So you can talk to my friends Rcds and Harold and Earl and all those guys in the support team.
Yeah, we'll investigate your issue. Okay. I don't understand exactly why it's on.
Okay.
Sorry,
with that, how are we doing?
It's on the share.
Yeah. I have no other questions.
I think we've covered exactly what I wanted to cover today.
Okay.
And if anyone has any other questions around what I've talked about, or kind of like some of the future, to show the stuff that's coming out in the future, if you have any suggestions around it, either post on our community or shoot me an email or a tweet.
So Martinez has actually picked at one of my pet peeves for you guys. One of the biggest challenges for me is that I use PowerApps on the web. I'm assuming that they're using Windows 7 or one of the down-level clients, and they don't get to use Flow as a result of that experience. When are you guys going to have parity there, or how long, how far is that? And I know I'm asking the wrong guy, but he happens to be in the room with us, right?
I share your pain.
Okay. So
it's something I advocate for every single time we go through planning. I think we are going to close this gap.
Okay.
My hope is we close it within by the end of this calendar year.
Okay. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire because it's not your team. It's not James' team, but it is something the team understands is a problem.
I keep giving the same feedback to the team that owns our authoring experiences as well, because it's a real pain in the ass.
Okay.
I agree, but yes, that is a huge gap today, and I wish that we had that support.
I tried to drag this out for another 2 minutes. It doesn't look like I'm going to get there, because what I promised everybody from my presenters, every minute that they're late, they owe me a beer. And every 10 minutes that they're early, I owe them a beer. We started 10 minutes late, and we're finishing 10 minutes early. I owe you 2 beers. With that, guys, my name is Charles Sterling. Thank you very much to you for changing your sessions. Elizabeth, thank you very much for bearing with us as we did the comedy peanut gallery thing getting started. And of course, I want to thank James for putting up with this. We are going to figure out this YouTube thing, and we're going to do a better job. Next week, we've got Power BI Embedded, which is actually all of what James showed was actually built on Power BI Embedded. And we're going to show you guys how to actually build those same sort of telemetry and performance graphs as what James' teams has done. So with that, I'm going to have James hit the stop button because I don't even have it on my machine anymore.
All right.